My name's Andy Holmes, I'm an author, and these are some writing tips from really famous authors that helped me. This is from Neil Gaiman. He said, this is how you do it. You sit down at the keyboard and you put one word after another until it's done. It's that easy and that hard. So sometimes when I'm writing, the blank page is really intimidating and I won't know what to do. And it's the worst feeling as a writer to sit there and stare at the blank page and feel like you're wasting your precious writing time. And sometimes you just have to start writing and force yourself to start going, and who knows, it might turn out better than you think. The next piece of advice comes from John Steinbeck, and he says, if you're using dialogue, say it aloud as you write it. Only then will it have the sound of speech. So this is a really simple trick. What I do is I actually read almost every word that I write out loud to my wife. And sometimes there's things that I think are really exciting or cool as I'm writing them, and then when I read them out loud, they're flat. And it's very obvious where they're flat or where the dialogue is not working when you read it out loud. So that's a neat little trick that helps you kind of understand the cadence or tone of what your writing is like. Okay, this next piece of advice is from Rose Tremaine. In the planning stage of a book, don't plan the ending. It has to be earned by all that will go before it. A lot of writers will disagree with this because there's some writers that meticulously outline every single scene, every single plot twist before they get to the end. Personally, I have a very, very hard time outlining a story all the way from beginning to end. Usually we'll try to outline to the middle and then right to the middle and then outline the rest, the middle to the end at that point. The reason is, even if I do manage to outline all the way to the end, the ending almost never turns out to be the way I thought it was going to, because things change as you go. The next piece of advice comes from Ernest Hemingway, and he says, there is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. This is a really famous quote on writing, and it's also very true, because it's all about, hitting this point where you're really the story's kind of just flowing out of you and you're just going with it. And it's really fun to hit this point as a writer because the story's almost moving in your mind faster than you can type, and you're sort of typing to keep up with whatever mental projector is playing in your head. But getting to that point can be painful, and it feels like sometimes it's bleeding, like you have to really work to achieve that state. So anyways, that's how I've applied that. The next advice is from Jack London. And he says, you can't wait for inspiration. You have to go after it with a club. This is great advice. In my opinion, the thing that makes the difference between the amateur and the professional is how they go about inspiring themselves. The amateur won't know how to find inspiration, won't know how to create, or just not do the writing or not do the work. The professional knows how to find his inspiration, knows how to create it, knows how to attack it. So what I do when I'm not feeling inspired or where I feel like I'm just staring at a blank page is I'll do things that I know will get my gears going. I'll start researching random things about Egyptian history. I'll grab my camera, I'll go out in the city, just start taking pictures. I'll look at really old photographs from like World War II. Anything to kind of get me out of whatever funk I'm in and to get my creative juices going. You probably already know what inspires you or what kind of activities will inspire you. It's just a kind of a neat trick to actively do the things that you know will inspire you with the intention of coming up with story ideas or figuring out what to write next. It really helps that way. The next advice is from Kurt Vonnegut, and he says, every sentence must do one of two things: reveal character or advance the action. Now this is interesting because fiction is so much different now than it was 100 years ago. If you read old books by like Dickens or the Victorian age, there's these long drawn out descriptions of character appearances and locations and stuff like that. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there was no internet back then and travel was like relegated to the elite or the rich. Most people weren't traveling, so the only window into the rest of the world they had was books. Today, you say the Eiffel Tower, everybody knows what that looks like because everyone can see what any city on earth looks like using a phone and going on YouTube or Instagram. So good writing today is much different than it was a long time ago, and I think it's more economical and more concise. So every word, every sentence you use really has to contribute to the character or the story and have a purpose. Just because it sounds pretty doesn't mean it belongs in your story. All right, the next piece of writing advice comes from Anton Chekhov. He says, don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. Okay, I'll probably make an entire video about this piece of writing advice, but for now I'll just say that it basically boils down to showing and not telling. And this is a rule that I had a really hard time understanding when I first started writing, because I didn't get why I couldn't just tell people things. And really it's just kind of a gimmick. It's just a way of saying things and communicating things to the reader that will produce more of an emotional impact as you're writing. As an example, you know, you get a better image saying, like, let's say there's a guy who's divorced, and you could say, Joe is a divorced middle-aged man. Or you could say, Joe rolled out of bed, rubbed the stubble on his face, and then touched the tan line around his finger where the wedding ring used to be, or where the wedding band used to be. See, that just has a little bit more artistic, like, impact and creates a better picture in the reader's mind. So yeah, work really hard to show and not tell. So the next pieces of advice here come from Ray Bradbury. And he says, quantity produces quality. If you only write a few things, you're doomed. Now, this is really interesting because when I first wanted to be a writer, my estimation of how much writing I would have to do to achieve a level of professionalism or hit a standard of writing that I really was striving for was totally out. It was very, very wrong. I thought like I didn't have to write or something. It's kind of funny because this is something that's just very simple but is not understood by a lot of people. Like when I went to college to be a creative writing major, the entire first semester I went to creative writing classes and I only wrote one short story. One, and that was my only assignment, was from my professors to write a short story as part of my final grade. In reality, if I wanted to be a writer at that time and I was being serious about it, I should have been writing one short story a week. Because that's how many words you have to write to really discover your voice, and enough practice gets done where you can hit that level of professionalism. Here's some more advice from Ray Bradbury. He says, the best hygiene for beginning writers or intermediate writers is to write a hell of a lot of short stories. If you can write one short story a week, it doesn't matter what the quality is to start, but at least you're practicing. And at the end of the year, you have 52 short stories, and I defy you to write 52 bad ones. Can't be done. At the end of 30 weeks or 40 weeks or at the end of a year, all of a sudden a story will come that's just wonderful. That is writing advice that I got way too late in my writing career, because I started out trying to write novels. I had all these book ideas in mind, these big sweeping stories I wanted to write. I didn't have the writer muscles to write that long. I didn't have the stamina to stick with a story that long. I didn't know how to handle all these things. So one of the best pieces of advice ever actually is this for me, because I just started to write short stories, and that's where I really learned my craft, and that's where I really felt that I started to get good, is when I started to write tons and tons of short stories. Okay, so thanks for watching. Those were some tips from some famous authors that really helped me. I hope they help you too, and I'll see you next time.